The 1970s was the decade the war film grew a conscience. The flag-waving certainties gave way to something rawer and more honest, films that dragged the camera into the mud, questioned the institutions sending men to die, and treated combat as trauma and absurdity rather than adventure. It was also the last great age of practical filmmaking. When these films show you 1,000 paratroopers or 15,000 infantrymen, those are real people on a real field. That combination of moral seriousness and scale is why the decade produced some of the finest war films ever made. Fall in. Number 20. Midway, 1976. We open with a spectacle that arrived in theaters literally rattling the seats. Midway dramatized the June 1942 naval battle that broke the back of Japanese power in the Pacific, and it did so with a gimmick audiences never forgot: sense around. The low-frequency rumble system that shook cinemas hard enough to make the whole experience feel physical. Around that showmanship, director Jack Smite assembled a genuine wall of stars: Charlton Heston, Henry Fonda, Glenn Ford, Robert Mitchum, and grounded the naval combat in raw archival footage of the real battle, splicing documentary reality into the drama. The seams sometimes show. The mix of genuine wartime film and studio work isn't always seamless, but the ambition is enormous and the film captures something essential about Midway itself: that it was a battle won as much by intelligence, luck, and split-second decisions as by firepower. As a rousing, old-school, Hollywood account of the Pacific War's great turning point, it earns its place as a gateway into this list, the spectacle before the storm. Number 19, Force 10 from Navarone, 1978. Nearly 2 decades after the guns of Navarone, this belated sequel sent another elite team behind enemy lines, and while it never quite scales the heights of the original, it delivers exactly the kind of rugged, practical, blow-up-the-bridge adventure the genre was built on. The mission is sabotage, a crack squad tasked with destroying a strategically vital bridge in wartime Yugoslavia. And the film leans hard into real explosions, real stunts, and the tactile pleasures of old-fashioned action filmmaking. What gives it a special poignancy now is its cast. This was one of Robert Shaw's final films before his sudden death, and it features a young Harrison Ford, fresh off Star Wars, alongside Edward Fox and Carl Weathers. Watching them work through a tightly plotted Alistair MacLean caper is a reminder of how satisfying pure competence can be. A movie that knows what it is, executes it cleanly, and never insults your intelligence. The bridge, when it finally comes down for real, and it's glorious. Number 18, The Wild Geese, 1978. Aging, cynical, and long past any illusions about glory, the mercenaries at the heart of The Wild Geese make this one of the toughest and most character-driven action films of the decade. Richard Burton, Roger Moore, Richard Harris, and Hardy Kruger play soldiers of fortune hired to rescue a deposed African leader and then betrayed and abandoned by the corporate paymasters who sent them. What elevates the film above standard men on a mission fare is its bitterness about the business of war. This is a movie fascinated by the ugly economics of hired violence, by the way powerful interests treat fighting men as disposable assets. Burton, in particular, brings a weary gravitas to a colonel who has seen too much, and the ensemble's lived-in chemistry gives the carnage real emotional stakes. It's violent, hard-hitting, and refreshingly unsentimental, a British action piece that understands the men who fight other people's wars for money usually end up paying the bill themselves. Number 17, The Boys in Company C, 1978. Before Platoon, before Full Metal Jacket, there was this: a fiercely realistic Vietnam film that traced a group of Marine recruits from the dehumanizing crucible of boot camp all the way into the chaos of jungle combat. Released a full decade before the great wave of Vietnam cinema crested, The Boys in Company C got there first, and it hits many of the beats those later, more celebrated films would make famous. Most strikingly, it features an early version of the sadistic drill instructor archetype that Stanley Kubrick would later immortalize. The film's boot camp sequences crackle with the same brutal intensity. What the film understands and communicates powerfully is how the machinery of war deliberately breaks men down before sending them to die, and how the idealism of young recruits curdles into disillusionment on contact with the reality of the war. It's rough around the edges, but its honesty was genuinely ahead of its time, a foundational text for everything the genre would do with Vietnam in the decade that followed. Number 16, Slaughterhouse-Five, 1972. Adapting Kurt Vonnegut was supposed to be impossible, and then George Roy Hill went and did it. So well that Vonnegut himself called it one of the few screen versions of his work he genuinely loved. Slaughterhouse-Five follows Billy Pilgrim, a man who has come unstuck in time, ricocheting without warning between his ordinary American life, his experiences as a prisoner of war, and an alien zoo on a distant planet. That dissociative structure isn't a gimmick. It's the whole point, a formal representation of trauma itself, of a mind shattered and reassembled out of order by an experience too enormous to process linearly. And at the film's center sits a historical horror it circles, the Allied firebombing of Dresden, which Vonnegut survived and which the film renders with quiet, devastating power. It's science fiction and war film and philosophical meditation, all at once, bound together by a tone of resigned cosmic sadness. So it goes. Few adaptations have ever captured an author's voice this completely. Number 15, The Eagle Has Landed, 1976. A tight, ingenious what-if thriller, The Eagle Has Landed imagines a covert squad of German paratroopers infiltrating a sleepy English village on a secret mission to kidnap Winston Churchill. What makes it work, and what makes it quietly subversive, is its refusal to caricature its German characters. Michael Caine plays the paratroopers commander as a professional soldier of genuine honor, a man of conscience trapped inside a monstrous cause, and the film generates real suspense precisely because it makes you understand its antagonists as human beings. It was the final film from the great John Sturges, director of The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, and it carries his trademark gift for sharp, unfussy military choreography and ensemble tension. Donald Sutherland and Robert Duvall round out a strong cast, and the whole thing unfolds with the satisfying precision of a well-oiled mechanism. It's a thriller first and a war film second, but as pure suspenseful storytelling, it's beautifully engineered. Number 14, Soldier of Orange, 1977. The film that announced Paul Verhoeven and Rutger Hauer to the world remains one of the most morally sophisticated war dramas ever made. Soldier of Orange follows a group of Dutch university friends whose lives are scattered in every direction by the Nazi occupation, some into the resistance, some into collaboration, some into paralyzed survival. And it refuses pointedly to offer easy heroism. This is a war seen from street level, where courage and cowardice are messily intertwined, where the right choice is rarely obvious in the moment, and where friendship and betrayal can wear the same face. Verhoeven brings a sprawling, novelistic sweep to the material, and Hauer, in the role that made him a star, is magnetic as a young man swept up in events he can barely comprehend. It's authentic in a way Hollywood occupation dramas rarely manage, a film that understands survival under tyranny as a series of impossible compromises rather than a simple test of virtue. Number 13, Catch-22, 1970. Mike Nichols took Joseph Heller's supposedly unfilmable satire and produced a pitch-black fever dream about the lunatic bureaucracy of war. A film whose reputation has only grown in the decades since it was unfairly overshadowed by MASH on release. Alan Arkin is perfect as Yossarian, the bombardier who has grasped the central insanity of his situation. That the only sane response to war is to want to get out of it, and that wanting to get out of it is precisely what the system defines as sane enough to keep you in. The film's surreal, circular comedy is anchored by an astonishing tactile reality. Real B-25 bombers, real airfields, a genuine sense of physical scale that makes the absurdist nightmare feel grounded. The supporting cast is a murderer's row, from Orson Welles to Anthony Perkins to Bob Newhart. It's funny, then horrifying, then both at once, building to moments of genuine anguish beneath the farce. As a portrait of institutional madness, nothing else in the genre comes close. Number 12, Go Tell the Spartans, 1978. Here is one of the most criminally overlooked war films ever made. A lean, cynical, atmospheric Vietnam drama set in the early advisory days of 1964, before the full American escalation, when the whole doomed enterprise was just beginning to reveal its futility. Burt Lancaster anchors it as a weary, clear-eyed major who can already see where this is all heading, assigned to hold a meaningless jungle outpost that becomes a microcosm of the entire war's pointlessness. Made on a modest budget and released just before the Vietnam film floodgates opened, it never got the audience it deserved, but those who found it treasure it. The film strips away every shred of romanticism to deliver something bleak, intelligent, and quietly devastating. A story about good men following bad orders toward an end they can all see coming. Lancaster's performance is one of the finest of his late career, and the film's fatalistic atmosphere lingers long after it ends. Seek this one out. It has been waiting patiently for its audience for decades. Number 11, Kelly's Heroes, 1970. What if you took a gritty behind enemy lines war movie and filled it with anachronistic 1970 counterculture attitude? You'd get Kelly's Heroes, a gloriously cynical heist film dressed in World War II fatigues, in which a band of American soldiers goes AWOL from the war itself to steal a fortune in Nazi gold. Clint Eastwood leads a spectacular ensemble, Telly Savalas, Don Rickles, and most memorably, Donald Sutherland as Oddball, a proto-hippie tank commander who talks about negative waves decades before he should plausibly know the phrase. That deliberate anachronism is the whole joke. The film uses its World War II setting to channel the anti-establishment, anti-authority mood of its own moment, suggesting that the real war was always just a racket the little guy should opt out of. Beneath the dark comedy is genuinely heavy practical action, including a superb tank battle, and the whole thing builds to a spaghetti western showdown that's pure deadpan delight. Subversive, funny, and secretly one of the most quotable war films ever made. Number 10, Johnny Got His Gun, 1971. Few films on any list are as harrowing as this one. Johnny Got His Gun was written and directed by Dalton Trumbo, the legendary blacklisted screenwriter, adapting his own novel, and it stands as perhaps the most uncompromising anti-war statement ever committed to film. Its premise is the stuff of pure nightmare. A young World War I soldier is hit by an artillery shell that takes his arms, his legs, his face, his sight, his hearing, and his ability to speak, leaving a fully conscious mind trapped inside a ruined, senseless body. The film locks the audience inside that mind with him, alternating between his desperate internal monologue, his memories, and his dreams as he slowly realizes the full horror of his situation and tries to find a way to communicate. It crosses the line from war film into pure psychological horror, and it earns every second of its dread. It's a genuinely difficult watch. It's meant to be, but as a statement about what war actually does to human beings, it is almost unbearably powerful. Decades later, Metallica would build a song and video around it, introducing its nightmare to a new generation. Number 9, Overlord, 1975. A quiet miracle of a film, Overlord blends an intimate, understated fictional narrative with real, restored archival combat footage so seamlessly that the boundary between drama and documentary all but dissolves. The story is simple. A young British soldier trains for and approaches the D-Day landings, sensing with strange certainty that he will not survive them. Around this gentle, melancholy through line, director Stuart Cooper weaves astonishing genuine footage from the Imperial War Museum's archives, creating a texture that feels less like a war movie than like a fever dream memory of the war itself. The black and white photography is ravishing. The mood is elegiac and dreamlike, and the whole film achieves a haunting sense of a young life poised on the edge of history's largest amphibious assault. For years, it was almost impossible to see until a Criterion restoration rescued it from an obscurity. It's one of the most poetic and immersive films ever made about the Second World War, history rendered as something felt rather than merely depicted. Number 8, Tora, 1970. Melodrama gets thrown overboard entirely in this clinical, meticulous, dual perspective reconstruction of the attack on Pearl Harbor. A film that dares to be about logistics, intelligence failures, and institutional breakdown rather than individual heroics. Told from both the American and Japanese sides, using American and Japanese directors working in parallel, Tora is fascinated by the chain of misjudgments, missed signals, and bureaucratic inertia that allowed the disaster to happen. Its commitment to accuracy is staggering, and its practical effects remain jaw-dropping. Full-scale aircraft mock-ups, enormous miniatures, and real pyrotechnics combine into an attack sequence of overwhelming scale and clarity that later films have plundered for stock footage ever since. It underperformed at the American box office, perhaps because audiences wanted heroes rather than an autopsy, but its reputation has grown enormously. And it now stands as the definitive dramatization of that morning. Sober, intelligent, and technically monumental, it treats history with a respect that borders on reverence. Number 7, The Duelists, 1977. Ridley Scott announced himself to the world with this, his feature debut, and one of the most visually ravishing films of the entire decade. Adapted from a Joseph Conrad story, The Duelists tracks a decades-long, obsessive feud between two officers in Napoleon's army, played by Keith Carradine and Harvey Keitel, who fight duel after duel across the years for reasons that grow increasingly abstract and irrational. It's a film about obsession, honor, and the way violence can become a purpose unto itself, but what stops the breath is its beauty. Every frame is composed like a painting, lit with the golden candle and mist glow of a period canvas come to life, with a museum-grade dedication to authentic uniforms, weapons, and brutal, unglamorous swordplay. Scott's genius for atmosphere and texture, which would define his entire career, is already fully formed here. It's a war film in miniature, the Napoleonic era refracted through the story of two men who cannot stop trying to kill each other, and it remains one of the most gorgeous debuts in film history. Number 6, A Bridge Too Far, 1977. A staggering logistical triumph, A Bridge Too Far recreates Operation Market Garden, the ambitious, catastrophically failed 1944 Allied plan to seize a series of bridges in the Netherlands and end the war by Christmas, on a scale that simply could not be replicated today without a computer. Director Richard Attenborough marshaled thousands of real paratroopers, genuine period armor, and one of the most spectacular all-star casts ever assembled. Sean Connery, Gene Hackman, Michael Caine, Anthony Hopkins, Robert Redford, Dirk Bogarde, and more, each anchoring a different piece of the sprawling operation. The scale is the point. This is a film about the vast grinding machinery of modern warfare and the human cost of overreach and hubris, and its willingness to depict a monumental Allied failure rather than a triumph gives it real moral weight. William Goldman's screenplay finds the human threads within the chaos, and the practical spectacle of thousands of parachutes filling the sky is the kind of thing modern cinema has simply forgotten how to do. Epic in the truest, most unfashionable sense. Number 5, Patton, 1970. It opens with a single unforgettable image, a man standing before an enormous American flag, delivering a blistering speech straight into the camera, and from that moment, Patton belongs entirely to George C. Scott. His fierce, thunderous, endlessly complex portrayal of the brilliant and deeply troubled general is one of the definitive performances in American cinema, so complete that Scott famously refused the Academy Award it won him, calling the ceremony a meat parade and refusing to have his work turned into a horse race. The film, scripted in part by a young Francis Ford Coppola, who won his own Oscar for it years before The Godfather, is far too intelligent to be simple hagiography or simple condemnation. Instead, it offers a grand, ambiguous psychological portrait of a warrior born for a kind of glory the modern world no longer permits. A man who believed he had lived before on ancient battlefields, who wrote poetry and slapped shell-shocked soldiers, whose genius on the battlefield was inseparable from the ego and cruelty that repeatedly destroyed his own career. Against sweeping desert, battlefields, and the vast machinery of war, director Franklin Schaffner keeps his focus on the contradictions of one extraordinary man. Remarkably, the film became a favorite across the political spectrum, embraced by hawks and doves alike, each side seeing its own version of Patton in Scott's towering performance. It won Best Picture, and it deserved to. Few biographical films have ever been this monumental and this psychologically penetrating at once. Number 4, Waterloo, 1970. There will never be another film like Waterloo because the world that made it possible no longer exists. To recreate Napoleon's final battle, Soviet director Sergei Bondarchuk, fresh off his monumental adaptation of War and Peace, was given roughly 15,000 real Soviet soldiers to serve as his extras. An entire army seconded from the Red Army and drilled for months, marching and charging and dying in vast, breathtaking formations across the screen. Bondarchuk reportedly commanded this force through a system of radio and field telephones, directing thousands of men like a real general marshaling a real battle. Every single person you see is real. There is no digital multiplication, no trickery, just an organic, overwhelming human scale that computer effects have never come close to matching. Rod Steiger delivers a fascinating, volcanic Napoleon, all wounded pride and failing health, and Christopher Plummer, a coolly elegant Wellington, but the true star is the battle itself. Captured in staggering overhead shots of living formations wheeling across the countryside like something out of a history painting brought to life. The cavalry charges, thousands of horses thundering across churned mud, have a weight and terror that no modern spectacle can replicate. The film's commercial failure was so damaging that it directly killed Stanley Kubrick's long-planned Napoleon project, which studios abandoned as too risky in its wake, a genuine tragedy for cinema. But what Bondarchuk achieved stands as perhaps the greatest purely practical battle spectacle ever filmed, an authentic wonder of the world, and one we will never see the likes of again. Number 3, The Deer Hunter, 1978. A devastating, monumental masterpiece, The Deer Hunter examines the Vietnam War not primarily through combat, but through the psychological decimation of a single close-knit community. A group of Russian-American steelworkers from a small Pennsylvania town whose lives are shattered by the war they go off to fight. Michael Cimino's film takes its time, luxuriating in the textures of blue-collar American life. A wedding that runs nearly half an hour, a hunting trip in the mountains, the orange glow of the mill, the easy camaraderie of the corner bar, before it ever reaches the war, so that when the horror finally arrives, it lands with annihilating force. That patience is the film's secret weapon. You know these men, you love them, before you watch the war take them apart. The Russian roulette sequences remain among the most unbearably tense passages in all of cinema. A metaphor so powerful it transcends any question of literal accuracy, and the ensemble is extraordinary. Robert De Niro at his most controlled and commanding, Christopher Walken in a shattering Oscar-winning turn, Meryl Streep in her first major role, John Savage, and John Cazale, the great actor of the era's American cinema, who was dying of cancer during filming and gave his final performance here, insured against Cimino's wishes by a studio that wanted to replace him. It's a film about friendship, community, masculinity, and the way a war can reach across an ocean to hollow out an entire town, leaving the survivors to sing God Bless America through their grief. Overwhelming, controversial, and unforgettable. A Best Picture winner that fully earned its place in history. Number 2, Apocalypse Now, 1979. A hallucinatory descent into the very heart of darkness. Apocalypse Now is the war film as fever dream. A towering, delirious, endlessly quotable journey up a jungle river toward madness that nearly destroyed everyone who made it. Francis Ford Coppola's legendarily catastrophic production, in which a typhoon leveled the sets, Martin Sheen suffered a near-fatal heart attack, a vastly overweight and unprepared Marlon Brando arrived having barely read the source material, and the whole enterprise spiraled wildly over budget and schedule in the Philippine jungle, has become as mythic as the film itself. Coppola famously declared that his film wasn't about Vietnam, it was Vietnam, that the madness of the shoot and the madness of the war had become one and the same. And somehow, out of all that chaos, he forged a masterpiece. Everything's real and physical. The helicopter swarms sweeping over the tree line to the strains of Wagner, the napalm blooming in orange walls of flame, the vast pyrotechnic apocalypse of the film's imagery. None of it faked or conjured after the fact. Robert Duvall's surf-loving colonel, who loves the smell of napalm in the morning, Marlon Brando's whispering, shadow-wreathed curts, the slow dissolve of Sheen's face into the ceiling fan. The film has burned itself permanently into the culture, endlessly quoted and imitated and never equaled. But beneath the spectacle is a genuine philosophical horror, a meditation on the madness at the core of the war and perhaps of the human soul itself, adapted from Joseph Conrad by way of a nightmare. It won the Palme d'Or, and it's not just a great war film, it's one of the greatest films ever made, full stop. Number 1, Cross of Iron, 1977, and at the absolute summit stands the most uncompromising war film of the decade. Sam Peckinpah's only war movie, and the purest distillation of mud, blood, and disillusionment the genre has ever produced. Cross of Iron does something almost no Hollywood film had dared. It tells its story entirely from the perspective of German soldiers on the Eastern Front, retreating in chaos before the advancing Red Army in 1943, and it strips away every scrap of political ideology to focus on the raw, apolitical reality of frontline survival. James Coburn is magnificent as Sergeant Steiner, a battle-hardened, deeply cynical soldier who despises the aristocratic officers and hollow honors of a war he no longer believes in. Embodied by Maximilian Schell's glory, hungry captain desperate to win the Iron Cross of the title. What sets the film apart is Peckinpah's unflinching, chaotic, visceral vision of combat. The battle sequences are a nightmarish blur of dirt, shrapnel, and sudden death. edited with his signature bursts of slow-motion violence, conveying not the clarity of heroism, but the disorienting terror of men caught in a meat grinder they cannot escape or comprehend. There are no clean victories here, no noble causes, only exhausted men trying to stay alive one more day amid the total moral collapse of the war around them. Peckinpah, the great poet of American screen violence, found in the Eastern Front the perfect canvas for his lifelong obsession with men pushed past the edge of endurance, and he poured everything he had into it, even as the production strained his health and his resources to the breaking point. The film reportedly ran out of money before the ending could be properly shot, forcing an abrupt, jagged conclusion that somehow only deepens its sense of a world coming apart. Orson Welles reportedly called it the finest anti-war film since All Quiet on the Western Front, and the comparison is earned. It flew under the radar on release, particularly in America, where audiences weren't ready for a war film that asked them to see the world through German eyes, but its reputation has grown steadily into the towering status it deserves. Cross of Iron is the ultimate expression of everything the 1970s war film was reaching toward. Tactile, furious, morally unblinking, and utterly without illusion. It refuses to comfort you, refuses to ennoble the slaughter, and refuses to pretend that anyone truly wins. It is the decade's war cinema stripped to its brutal essence, and the finest war film of the 1970s. 20 films, one extraordinary decade, and a single shared refusal to look away. What unites this list, from the seat-shaking spectacle of Midway to the mud-caked despair of Cross of Iron, is a generation of filmmakers who took war seriously enough to show it honestly. The absurdity, the trauma, the institutional failure, the overwhelming human cost, and yes, on occasion, the sheer staggering scale of it, captured with thousands of real people on real fields in a way we will likely never see again. These are films built by hand, powered by conviction, and unafraid of hard truths. That's exactly why they endure while so much modern spectacle evaporates on contact. So, tell us in the comments, did we rank Cross of Iron too high or not high enough? Which of these have you actually seen, and which one did we leave off that you'd have fought to include? For our money, the 1970s stands as the single greatest decade the war film ever had. Make your case for the film that belongs at the top, and if this countdown reminded you of a classic you'd forgotten or introduced you to one you'd never heard of, give it a like, because a decade of filmmaking this fearless deserves an audience that's still paying attention.